Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this community conversation on decoding the new nomenclature, what SLD, MASLD, MASH, MetALD mean for patients and providers. My name is Henry Chang. I am the Executive Director of the Fatty Liver Foundation, and we're very delighted that you can join us for this 30-minute session. Before I begin, I would like to first play a short video from Wayne Eskridge, who's the founder and CEO of the Fatty Liver Foundation.
Welcome to our webinar. This is Wayne Eskridge. I'm the founder and CEO of the Fatty Liver Foundation. I can't join you today because I'm taking treatments for multiple myeloma, but I'm sure the webinar will be just as good without me. Just a word about how we come to this nomenclature thing. The first time I'd ever heard of NASH was when I was diagnosed as a stage 4 cirrhosis patient due to NASH. I thought at the time that this was really a strange way to name something. You name it for what it's not, non-alcoholic. But there's multiple reasons why you end up with cirrhosis. And I've been an advocate for a better name ever since my diagnosis in 2015. So this is an important step from my perspective, because it will, although confusing in the short run, is going to give us better definitions of disease. And this webinar will be a part of the education for that. And I certainly hope you enjoy it and have a good program. So thank you very much for attending.
So just by way of introduction, for those of you who are not familiar with Fatty Liver Foundation, we're a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the identification, diagnosis, treatment, and support people living with fatty liver, NAFLD, NASH through awareness, screening, education, and patient outreach. Next. Just wanted to quickly go over a couple of disclosure and disclaimer statements. This session may contain discussions of investigational uses of agent and diagnostic that are not indicated by the US FDA. We also encourage the participant that this is meant not to serve as guideline for patient self-management or patient management by healthcare professionals. Next slide, please. So for today, these are the learning objectives. We're going to focus on why the old terms like NAFLD, NASH were causing problems and even stigma. Second, to understand what the new terms mean for you and your healthcare journey. Third, find out how these changes can make diagnosis and treatment better for you and easier for healthcare providers. And lastly, recognize the significance of the new nomenclature in patient advocacy efforts. So we have an exciting program lineup for all of you today. We will first hear from Dr. Niraj Mistry, who's the Chief Medical Officer at the Fatty Liver Foundation. He will go over the current terminology, NAFLD, NASH, and then highlight the key changes in the new nomenclature. And then we're also very pleased to have Jen Jones, who is the founder and visionary of the Society for Sober Liver Survival. And she'll talk about her own personal journey, as well as offer some perspectives on MetALD. So with that, let me introduce Dr. Mistry, who will go over the current terminology, as well as highlight some of the new terminology from patient perspective. Niraj, over to you.
Thank you, Henry, and welcome everyone. I'm going to sort of just cover a bit of the science. There's a lot to cover with that, and also the process of the nomenclature change, and particularly then go into the implications for the patient community. And just to sort of reiterate that this is a series of webinars that, or part of a series of webinars that the Fatty Liver Foundation is doing in order to raise awareness around this nomenclature change and understand those patient perspectives and implications that it has for the patient community. So as we all know, the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which was the previous term, is fast becoming the commonest form of chronic liver disease around the world. And it affects nearly 1/3 of the global population. And we know that fatty liver disease is not a disease on its own, but it is very much a confluence of other risk factors and other diseases. It's increasingly leading to end-stage liver disease globally, and as a result has also been a very common cause of liver cancer, and very often without underlying cirrhosis, as was generally thought to be the cause of liver cancer when it came to other factors that led to it. It's commonly associated with excess body weight, and also a very strong association with type 2 diabetes, abnormalities in cholesterol and triglyceride metabolism, as well as high blood pressure, often forming what is constitutes the metabolic syndrome from the medical side. Next slide, please. And as we can see, NASH is becoming the fastest growing indication for liver transplant, with a sharp rise, particularly in that orange graph that we're looking at. Next slide. So the challenges that we had with NASH and NAFLD, which I think a lot of the new nomenclature is starting to address, is that because there were minimal side effects, this was what we call the silent disease. And even when the doctors had screened and picked it up, it was often trivialized, well, this is just fatty liver. And rather than looking at the trajectory that it was particularly on. There was also low awareness on how to stratify patients. And I think now we're getting distinct associations of the comorbidities associated with fatty liver disease, and our understanding to then look at those comorbidities as a combination of risk factors that would predict who might get fatty liver disease. The Fatty Liver Foundation is working on an exciting machine-based learning risk stratification for patients, and we'll have another community conversation around that. There's also limited knowledge of the non-invasive tests, and moving from the gold standard which was liver biopsy, which is quite an invasive test, we now have other alternatives that will not only screen, but also can stage disease. And very often, when from a medical side of things, doctors can be reluctant to go down a path of investigation when there isn't an intervention that can be done. And when I say intervention, generally considered from the medical side, as opposed to looking to those lifestyle factors that can be altered in order to change the disease projection. And finally, I think the largest issue that was raised as a concern was the stigma associated, firstly with non-alcoholic as a term which ties to alcohol, can be disparaging for those who have alcohol-related disease. And it's also odd to name a disease as something that it's not, as opposed to something that it is. So those were part of the things. And then the term fatty created this perception that brought about, well, it's the patient's fault, and they're being lazy, and they're not taking charge of their lives. So when we looked at the changing of the nomenclature, one of the things that we looked at was, and this was quite jestful, but it also reflected a reality for patients. And imagine Pluto, and if there were sort of aliens living on Pluto, and here we were changing whether Pluto was considered a planet or not. Would that have any implications to those aliens living on Pluto? And that's how we felt as the patient community, that with these changes in nomenclature, at the end of the day, our patients still have the disease. So we really wanted to understand what the implications were for the patient community. Next slide, please. Okay, and the world appears depending where you view it from. And when we look at this nomenclature change, whether you're a patient, a policymaker, as part of broader society or a medical expert, this has different implications. And from a patient point of view, it was critical for our patients to feel empowered and have a better understanding of the disease, and at the same time start dismantling those factors that have stigma. From a policy point of view, it has implications, and particularly with resource allocation for medical experts, categorization of the disease, deeper and more nuanced customization in research and interventions, and also then from a social perception, how do we create solidarity in the movement? Next slide. So the process by which this was, the nomenclature change came about was, I have to say, an admirable process. And certainly all the organizations and the regional representative bodies that set up about this, kudos to them. They had a deeply extensive representation, including patient populations. And I did hear at one of the sessions here at AASLD that 11% of those engaged were actually from the patient community. So that was a really inclusive participatory process by which it was engaged with. Next slide. And through that renaming, they needed to look at a broad range of issues, as we discussed, on how those challenges and issues with the current nomenclature needed to be addressed, the importance of the defining the terms, the definitions and endpoints when it came to research. How should the role of alcohol be accounted for or not in this entire thing? What the overlaps were, how this would change levels of awareness, clinical trials, regulatory pathways, and how this would sort of think about as we define issues in future and how it fell in that particular classification. So there were a lot of considerations that went into this process. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is sort of a world map footprint view on the participation in this. There were 264 nominees that were involved in this and 56 countries. So really global representation, and perhaps there could be more, but I think it was a good sampling from around the world. Next slide. Okay, and these are some of our people, the people that were involved, and we had the likes of Wayne, the founder of the Fatty Liver Foundation, together with Donna Cryer from the Global Liver Institute, among many of the representatives involved in this. Next slide. Okay, so this is what the panel reached consensus on. So the really broad umbrella of all of this is SLD, steatotic liver disease. And this is essentially saying fat in the liver. And that has all these subcategories. And I think the large issue or area is MASLD and MASH, where this is metabolic dysfunction associated steatotic liver disease, which then progresses on to MASH, which is metabolic dysfunction associated steatohepatitis. But I think the other important thing that happened here was this area of MetALD, that with MASLD, the use of alcohol was also included, and it then had this overlap. And we'll hear from Jen's story about how this is the opportunity for us to bridge a huge gap. There was also alcoholic liver disease, as well as other areas that were more nuanced classifications of the disease. Next slide. Okay, and I think what is also important now is that there was a diagnostic pathway and an algorithm that people could use in order to get these diseases. And this is critical because this can be passed down to some to primary care providers, not just hepatologists and people specialized in the disease, but it can be applied to the broader medical community, and something that we found a huge gap and challenge with when it actually came to patients getting screened and diagnosed with liver disease. Next slide. Okay, and with that, we also had the cardiometabolic criteria, and as we talked about, the comorbidities that affect patients with these conditions and lead and are precursors to fatty liver disease, and they are quite strict criteria now with parameters to start classifying the disease, both for adults as well as children. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so now that we have the terminology established, and from a patient community point of view, and there has been a lot of controversy around the introduction of this nomenclature, and I think there are certain regions of the world that still need to sign up to this. But for us as a patient community, we need to get on with the work of supporting our patients. And so a lot of us have adopted this and now are looking at the implementation of this. And we feel it's really important for us to have a unified voice in accepting this and putting this out to our patient community. Next slide. Next slide, please. Hello, Tiffany.
One second, Niraj. We're having a little difficulty. We got disconnected. So, little technical difficulty.
So maybe I'll just continue. I have the slides pulled on my deck. So I think the key takeaways that we had from this nomenclature as we looked at this very unified implementation. So a few key points. Firstly, we need to be very respectful of the sensitivities and rather than use the different sensitivities as opportunities or as a consequence of dividing people, what we want to do is be much more inclusive. And I think what we have in this sort of broad overarching categorization under SLD gives us that opportunity to start unifying the voice across this. The other opportunity we have is that with more nuanced and detailed categorization, we can now start customizing responses. And so that's what we're looking at. Tiffany, did you manage to get it back on? Not yet. Okay. So here's where we are when it comes to opportunities with the patient community. Okay. That's great. Can we move ahead? Okay, and next. So these were all the endorsers of the new nomenclature, and I think this is sufficient critical mass for us to start moving forward with implementation. Next slide. Okay, so here's where we see the key opportunities for the patient community. With this more nuanced categorization, we have the greater opportunity for refined categorization and staging in understanding the causation of these diseases. And it also gives us multiple entry points for diagnosis and staging. There can be greater awareness and sensitization for patients and providers. There's more opportunities for therapeutic and lifestyle interventions. And so we can customize and design, create peer groups and tools in order for us to address this together with multidisciplinary care. And we know that it's not just about medical interventions, but it's about dietary support, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, psychological counseling, mental health care, etc. And this is the customized care that we talked about. But it's also very empowering from a patient point of view to understand their disease in the specificity for them as an individual and also as part of a group and where they fit into that. It also acknowledges the realistic multiple risk, multiple causes in the lives of patients. Patients don't follow the textbook in their particular categorization of disease, but life is a complexity of these various factors. And then it also gives us understanding in the milieu of the comorbidities that lead to many of these diseases. Next slide. Okay, and so just as an overview and a simplified representation, and while we have many etiologies, the patient journey is a common journey, and you know, each patient is on their own journey, but all those factors along the way are something that we can find a lot of solidarity in. Next slide. Okay, and this is still the mainstay of management when it comes to steatotic liver disease. It's managing the diet, limiting alcohol intake and moderating that, ensuring there's physical activity, and maintaining a good balanced diet when it actually comes to managing care. Next slide. Okay, and so at the end of the day, it is about the solidarity where we're calling from the patient community to work with patients, not just in token representation, but with significant engagement all along the continuum from research to policy and program implementation. We have to ensure that in order for that to happen, the science and the medicine is related to and communicated to patients in ways that are accessible and understandable. We have to design services and intervention from a patient perspective, not from a provider perspective. And so it's not patients going to the health system, but the health system meeting the patients where they are, looking at the holistic needs from a multidisciplinary angle, and then dismantling stigma. It's not your fault, but this is our collective responsibility to address that in the care and support of patients. And the next slide. Okay, so there was a lot of information, and I apologize for that, and particularly going through it quite fast, but we do have short time, and we will make these slides available to everyone. So Jen, with that, over to you.
Thank you. I needed to unmute myself. Hello, everybody. You know, my name is Jen Jones, and thank you, Niraj, for such an enlightening view of what we're doing today. It's very exciting with the new nomenclature. And as Niraj was talking about, I'm here to talk to you from a patient perspective. Today, I am 10 years safe from severe intimate partner violence and 5 years sober from alcohol. My life-threatening diagnosis left me more afraid than I was staying in 4 different domestic violence shelters with an abuser who stalked me across 5 states. But my shame made me too embarrassed to even talk to my family about what was going on. And I thought that I would be better off dead. My dog Orion was actually who saved my life. I needed him and he needed me. But if only I'd had somebody to share these feelings with, someone who would come out on the other side alive and with hope. Our goal at Sober Liver is to be that someone. We are going to be providing group and peer mentor-peer support while reducing stigma and shame, while increasing connection and belonging, which is my goal for all people with SLD, regardless of the toxins that got them to this point. So today I will share how this new category under steatotic liver disease, aka the SLD umbrella, MetALD, will bring us together to reach these goals and to save lives. Next slide. When first diagnosed with alcohol-associated liver disease, shortened to ALD, I began to research NAFLD, and it always left me a bit baffled. I recalled my sports bar days where some of my friends with high BMIs would eat mounds of chicken wings, burgers, and fries while pounding beers and downing shots with me. My heart started to sink as my abusers had isolated me and I had lost contact with my friends. What if someone had been diagnosed with fatty liver? Would they be labeled as someone with NAFLD based on their self-reported alcohol use? I know the half-truths I used to tell on that alcohol questionnaire, reporting my social drinking, but not what I was drinking, self-medicating. There are many people that don't want to be transparent about alcohol use for fear of losing their job, their children, or for me, the abusive partner that would just have another reason to berate me. Metabolic dysfunction is easier to diagnose, as many, not all, have higher BMIs. The establishment of this new category will change the way doctors diagnose this liver disease. This category will lead to enhanced funding for accurate diagnostic tests and specific treatment for patients diagnosed with MetALD. Next slide. This funding will lead to more clinical trials for the patients that are eligible, and these eligibility requirements will become a little less easier for all of us who may have been ineligible before. This new category will expand the eligibility on both ends of the spectrum to include people with alcohol use for metabolic dysfunction studies and metabolic dysfunction studies for people with alcohol-associated liver disease. My hope is that this category will lead to the development of therapeutics and cures that will be effective for the entire umbrella of SLDs, not leaving anyone out in the rainstorm. Slide 4. We want the sun to shine again for all patients with SLDs. Similar life adjustments are necessary no matter where they fall on the spectrum. Everything should be low in salt. The consumption of food and drink should also be low in sugar and many times high in protein. And we must keep our potassium in that optimum range. And as new research is showing, alcohol for everyone with SLDs is the safest choice. This includes cooking or baking with alcohol. Did you know that it can take more than 2 hours to simmer the wine out of alcohol, or alcohol out of wine? I'm sorry. My significant other, who still unfortunately makes hard cider, uses the raisins to soak the cider for months to make bread and cookies. I'll admit, these are the only sweet treats that have been the only urge I've had to break my sobriety. But instead of when I smell that banking, I just get up and I turn on my favorite song and I dance around. I normally do it to Comeback Kid by New Politics. What's your strong song? Unifying around stories like these and sharing coping strategies to break both food and alcohol urges would support all people with SLD. We are stronger together than we are in silos, and MetALD can bridge this connection. Lastly, as we educate patients like you, it is your opportunity to start educating providers about this new category. And for those diagnosed with MetALD, it's their time to shine, expressing their needs for mental health, food addiction, alcohol use disorder, social support. Programs like Sober Liver will create targeted support to connect people with MetALD and build their capacity to heal and create a sense of belonging. With MASH, MASLD, and now ALD, our new alphabet soup, now connected under the steatotic liver disease umbrella by our new friend MetALD, we can forge ahead together on a dry path, leading to awareness, increased funding, novel therapeutics, and yeah, I can see through the clouds. Can you? A cure. Thank you, everyone.
Jen,
And that will
thanks.
conclude. Yep, go ahead, Niraj.
Oh, thank you so much, Jen. And, you know, I'm always inspired by your story. And this morning was a panel on the importance of telling stories. And I think as we combine these stories and put it under this broader umbrella of steatotic liver disease, I think we can generate huge momentum and a sense of solidarity in tackling many of these issues. So I know we are at time. The Fatty Liver Foundation will make these slides available. There were some videos, questions that came online. And I do want to just sort of point to one question. And I think it was from a service provider who said that with his particular patients, he didn't find the term stigmatizing. And I want to point to the fact that there were quite different views on the stigma, on the medical jargon side of things, about the complexity of the classification. But what is important to realize that while there were very differing views, the consensus from this very representative group came to this conclusion. And from a patient community point of view, we feel empowered now to move forward and build this movement together to tackle all these diseases and provide the best care and support that we can for our patients.